Welcome to Redundancy Matters with me, June Hogan. I'm a qualified career coach, I'm an outplacement specialist, and I've got a background in HR. And this is the podcast where I help HR professionals and leaders manage your redundancies to put people at the heart of the process. So if you've ever had that moment when you know a restructure is on the horizon and then you find yourself hunting through spreadsheets or digging into your HR information system, looking at shared drives, emails, and trying to get all the information together to ensure it's accurate and reliable, you'll know that that's a crazy time. And that's before things get really busy once you've announced. But when your HR data is clean, consistent, and reliable, it makes that planning stage feel a bit calmer. And you can focus your energy where it really counts and focus it on what you're good at, which is supporting people through a tough time with empathy. So in this episode, I'm talking to Gill Wetherill, who's a former HR director and HR systems consultant. And we talk about how HR systems, whether you've got a clever one or whether you're still wrestling with spreadsheets, can genuinely help you plan and deliver restructures. Okay, let's dive in to today's episode. Welcome to today's episode of Redundancy Matters, and today I'm really excited to be joined by Gill Wetherill. Gill is a HR information systems consultant, and she's also a former HR director, and she's the founder of Full Circle HR. And we're going to be talking today about how we can use data from HR information systems in the planning and the implementation of redundancies and restructures. So really looking forward to our conversation today, and thanks for joining me, Gill.
Thanks for having me, June. Lovely to be here.
Wonderful. So that was a very short introduction. Would you like to just tell us a bit more about you, what you do now, and what you did before you set up your own business?
Yeah, sure. It's a lovely introduction. Thank you. So, I guess in terms of my background, first of all, my career spanned over 30 years, really quite a generic career, really, in HR. Also did a little bit of a stint in L&D for a few years. And I've been involved in lots of redundancies and restructuring programs through my career, quite sadly, really. I've worked in numerous sectors. I probably did my longest in education. I've also worked in utilities in the gas and electricity sector. I've worked in private sector businesses, financial planning, investment management and legal. And I now run a consultancy business called Full Circle HR, which provides support for HR system implementation. So we work mostly with SMEs and HR teams to help them find their best HR system, the best one for their business, and help them to implement it so that they get the most out of it.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you're bringing all that experience over the years and then specialising in systems. So I'm curious, what made you specialise in HR systems?
Actually, it was after being made redundant that I decided to have a look at setting up my own business. And because I wasn't a specialist, I was very generalist in my role. It was, what do I want to do? And I worked with a coach, actually, to really understand where my strengths lay, where my skills lay, but also what really motivates me. And working with the coach, I looked back through my career and I looked at things that I really enjoyed doing. And although I'd worked quite strategically in my last few roles, I've always been quite operationally focused. I really enjoy processes. I always enjoy finding better ways of working. And I'd done a number of HR systems implementations when I was working in-house. And I always thought, there's not many people that do this. So I decided that's what I wanted to do. So it's something I'm really passionate about and I really enjoy.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, as you say, you're bringing all of that together. And in terms of, you say you've experienced redundancy yourself and you've unfortunately had to manage lots of programs as well. So I always ask guests, so why does redundancy matter to you?
Redundancy matters to me personally because I have experienced it myself and how it's made me realise that there's a good way to do it and there's a poor way to do it. And like I say, I've been involved in so many restructuring and redundancy programs through my career. And it's always been really important to me to make sure that I do the best that I can for people and that I make sure that I stay human and kind and respectful. And I've always been there for people, really. And I guess that they're like underlying core values that I have. When I was made redundant, I wasn't really treated very well. It was awful and it opened up my eyes. And in all honesty, it really affected my mental health at what was already a difficult time. So that really made me realise how wrong sometimes organisations get it.
Yeah, it's something that I hear lots of really positive stories about organisations that have really embraced the process, and others sadly where, yeah, they've fallen short. So when we're looking in the planning stages of restructure, redundancy, how do you think HR professionals preparing can make best use of the HR system?
Yeah, okay. So obviously it's awful, isn't it, when HR realise that they are going to have to make redundancies or there's going to be some restructuring. And I think it's never a nice position for anybody involved. But I think having a good HR system in place, which has got accurate and up-to-date information, can really help the process run more smoothly. It should really be your single source of truth. So the system where you can get information on headcount and cost, obviously information on things like notice periods and all of the employment history. So having all that information to hand is just so useful. And as well, thinking about things like organisational chart tools, headcount analysis, that can all be really useful at this stage. And a really sophisticated HRIS can actually do so much more as well. So it can help predict workforce insights. It can help with things like scenario planning and chart modelling and forecasting. So especially in organisations where you might have a fluctuation of staff, maybe seasonal in, say, for example, hospitality or leisure or retail, it can really help HR teams and leaders use models to think about different downsizing scenarios before planning redundancies. Of course, we need to explore whether there's any other options available, don't we?
Yeah, so having access to, as you say, that single source of truth and the accurate data. And my experience when I worked in operational HR, obviously that goes back way before you start this process, because you need to be feeding with proper information in terms of gathering all of that and being confident that you've got everything in one place and that the data is accurate. But as you say, if you're able to do that, the possibilities of being able to use the system in the right way can save time, and also they can save things further down the line that might come to light when someone says, actually, no, I'm on 6 months notice, not 3 months because your system's wrong, which those aren't nice conversations, are they, when you have to have those?
No, absolutely. And it can feel quite embarrassing, can't it, really, actually? It's bad enough having to go through these processes, but if the data's wrong, if it's incorrect, that's just not helpful, and it can be a little bit embarrassing as well.
Yeah, yeah, and also throw off your cost modelling, as you say, because you're not working with accurate information. So what can HR teams be doing just as best practice, as a matter of course, to make sure that whatever system they've got, however sophisticated it might be or basic, that they are making sure that the data is accurate?
Yeah, this is absolutely crucial, really. HR needs to be regularly auditing employee data to ensure that everything is kept up to date. There's so many important fields that are used, isn't there? Job titles, reporting lines, locations, contractual hours, salaries, of course. And I always like to advise clients to run data cleansing cycles. Ideally, I would suggest on a quarterly basis, but realistically, not everybody has the capacity to do that. So even half yearly or even annually is better than nothing. And using things like self-service, if you've got a HR system, so you can ask employees to check their own data, that can be really useful. The other things that you can do in advance is make sure that your organisation chart matches the reality of what's really happening. So out-of-date reporting lines can cause huge problems when you're looking at running selection pools for collective consultation, for example. So making sure that you've got that structure right. It's about roles rather than people. So to me, that's where this planning starts, not concentrating on the people, but really focusing on the role. So making sure that the job data is very accurate. Job titles, are they consistent? Have you got the information that you need around notice periods? Things like continuous start dates if somebody's joined from another organisation, making sure that you've got all of those records in the HR system and that they're all accurate, because obviously that's going to feed in to calculations if it gets to that. Other things like other data that you need to have in the system, like skills and performance data. So making sure that you've got training records in that to date, CPD records, absence, of course, as well. Going back to performance, how do you record performance data? How can you track and monitor performance? Do you have a scoring system? Have you got KPIs that track things like sales or error rates? And making sure, of course, all of these things are consistent and that they're not discriminatory and that they're relevant.
Yeah, and that's interesting in terms of performance, for example, because performance is a wide category and can be used, as you say, from selection perspective. And I guess it's that notion that if you have the data and you've got a field for the data, that if you're going to use it, you need to make sure that everyone's using it consistently. Otherwise, you'll be running reports from one system and then going out to local managers and asking them, and it'll just get really messy, I can imagine, and quite confusing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, especially on performance as well, is where HR teams suddenly find that they've got gaps and they're only now starting to realise the importance of, making sure that managers kept up to date with reviews, or they might have done the reviews, but they haven't actually completed them in the system. And you might have got a system that actually sends automated notifications, but if they've been ignored, it's at this crucial time then that people sometimes start to realise how important these things actually were.
Yeah, definitely. And that point you made earlier about that it's roles and not people, and that really accurate information around the reporting lines, what are people's job titles, and how does that all fit together? Because again, if you're doing like a desktop exercise in the initial planning stages, which often you are, because you can't involve everybody in the planning because of confidentiality, you need to be relying on what's in the system at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so in terms of when you're thinking about the actual restructure, so, the restructure is going ahead, decisions have been made, and you're in consultation. When you're using the system in that sense, and I think when we were chatting before about, for example, understanding where you might have certain protections for people who have either been on maternity leave, who were going on maternity leave, and that kind of thing in terms of the new legislation. But when you're in the thick of it, if you like, you're managing the restructure. How does the system help you in that sense in having something that's accurate and that people can rely on?
Well, I guess on that, it's important to remember that obviously it's only going to be as accurate as the information that we put into a HR system, of course. So there's always going to be that making sure that we have clear processes in place in our teams to check information. Because everybody is human. So, it is all down to data inputting at the end of the day. But yes, making sure that we've got accurate data in place if we're going to be doing a restructure. It's so important, obviously, from a high risk point of view because of the legal perspective. Every decision needs to be based on clean and defensible data, really. If there is information there that is incorrect, if job details are wrong, it can lead to incorrect selection pools or unfair scoring or people being placed at risk where maybe they shouldn't have been. Making sure that we're getting accurate data from a HR system, it just helps to build trust, really. If employees can spot records in their own data, that can be really helpful as well. The beginning part of the exercise, if you go into selection, can be actually to ask employees first just to confirm that the information that you hold on them is correct. And yeah, I think it is a time, isn't it, when emotions are often running high through restructures. So making sure that data is accurate and correct just helps remove an added layer of that stress really there when it's not needed.
Mm. And that point there about, asking the employee to verify that this is the information that we hold and just making sure that's correct. I think that's bringing them into the process and being transparent and creating that trust, as you say. And if that data is incorrect for whatever reason, then you've got an opportunity to either pause the process, go back in, understand what, in terms of if it's you've got the wrong address, whatever, you can change that. But if it's something like length of continuous service, or it's something like, as you say, the reporting line, then that's more fundamental and may well have an impact on the rest of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just about storing data, is it? It's like you were saying a little bit earlier about the protection for maternity returners as well. So it's about having a system that you can help to track these things. So not just what was the date when someone was on maternity, but actually if they've got 18 months of protection going forward then from the date of the child's birth, how are we going to get that information out of the system in time? How are we actually going to be able to remember about who these ladies were in the organisation? Will people's HR system hold that information? Will there be a flag or a notification in 18 months' time when that kind of protection has now lapsed? Or do HR teams need to keep that information in separate spreadsheets, maybe, if their HR system doesn't have the capacity to hold that all in one place?
Yeah, exactly. So I guess there might be some systems that, because this is relatively new legislation, for example, they might not have, as you say, the ability to flag that inside the system.
Yeah.
And so if you've got people, and I'm sure there will be lots of people listening to this who might not have a HR information system, they're using spreadsheets. Lots of organizations will be doing that. What advice would you give people working on spreadsheets to make sure that their information is accurate and the data is as consistent as it can be?
Yeah, and quite common. And it's been a bit of an eye-opener to me in terms of how many organisations are still running their business on spreadsheets. And that's absolutely fine. Even organisations with over 100 staff, as long as they can make that work. I think sadly, when you come to situations like this where you're encountering restructuring and redundancies, the reality is that it is going to make things take longer in terms of time, and there is going to be a little bit of a high risk of getting some of the information wrong, but it is still doable. And I've had to do it myself as well, manage employee data from spreadsheets. So in terms of tip, what I would say is get to that position of having one single source of the truth as quickly as you can. And it's not always the information in the HR department, but checking what information is held about pay, about hours, in maybe finance, in payroll. So have a look at what their records are saying and get to the point where you've got maybe one master spreadsheet. Make sure that's a lockdown version as well. You don't want to end up with having multiple copies emailed around between you and payroll. So make sure that you lock down kind of one master version that's the single source of the truth that you're keeping up to date. And then it's about data cleansing, really. So using data validation tools to make sure your information is as clean as it can be. So drop downs and protected cells, and using things like filtering tools and conditional formatting to highlight any blanks and inconsistencies, using formulas to cross-check information. Sometimes with dates as well, just building in those checks to make sure that things make sense, that somebody's start date isn't, look at it in comparison to their date of birth and things like that, because sometimes these errors do just happen. Look for blank, remove blank fields in data wherever you can. Standardization, I would say, is key. So things like job titles, this is really important when you're looking at things like selection pools. And again, I have had this myself as well, where you've got a spreadsheet, and because different people in the team doing inputting, you've ended up with an administrative assistant. You've also got another job title of an admin assistant, and then you've got an admin ASST, which is probably a different person, same role and what have you. So before you know it, you've got all these different ways that you can type a job title, but it's actually the same job, the same kind of job category for people. So just really standardizing things like job titles, either using a drop-down field or maybe putting some processes in place, like documenting those standards as a process to make sure that all the HR team are using that kind of standard way of inputting going forward. That can just really help you manage the data that's on spreadsheets.
Yeah, some really useful tips there. And back in the day when I was analysing things on spreadsheets, I remember the job titles thing was an absolute nightmare. As you say, you can have 4 or 5 different ways of describing exactly the same job title. And yeah, doing all the filtering and all of that. creates a lot of noise. And also there's time in there. And when you're doing analysis and you think you've got it right, and then you realise you've missed off 4 people because the job title was not on the filter.
This is it, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think we alluded to it earlier about things like absence, for example. I know lots of organisations don't use absence as a criteria for obvious reasons, because potentially it can be discriminatory. And unless you've got really accurate records, then it's probably quite difficult to use absence. And just from what you've said there in terms of relying on the inputting of data and that kind of thing, is there anything else in the system that you really have to kind of make sure that the input needs to be accurate? And we're talking about performance, for example. So if you're going to use something that's in the system, really having those rules and those guidelines around how you actually enter the data. Otherwise, you either have to say, we're not just going to use it at all, unless we can be absolutely 100% confident that it's going to be right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, performance is one of those. And so if we're talking about using spreadsheets, or if we're talking about using a HR system, it is down to about how you set it up. So training records, qualifications, if you haven't got a standardized approach in there, how easy is it then if you end up needing to look at a selection process and you wanting to actually think, okay, let's have a look at who's got the most skills, who's the most qualified for this role. So how easy is it for you to get that information out of the system? Really depends on how it's being set up, how it's being gathered, and how it's being maintained going forward.
And so if you were advising one of your clients on the kind of system, and I guess it depends on budget and depends on lots of different things in terms of their requirements, but what would be some of the things that you'd be recommending they'd want in their system or need in their system in order to make full use of it in this kind of situation in terms of a restructure?
I think a lot of HR systems these days have employee self-service. And that's a really good starting point, because that's actually giving employees access at any point to have a look at their employee information. So just make sure that their data is correct. So that's like a basic minimum, I would say. Reporting is got to be up there. That's absolutely key, isn't it? So transparent reporting, because the leaders who are making these decisions, who are going to be involved, they will come to the HR team and they will expect data very quickly. Being able to extract that in a way that's going to work and give them the information in the right format when they need it quite fast is going to be key. What you don't want to be doing is gluing together bits and bobs of information from different reports or different spreadsheets and saying, I'll come back to you 2 weeks on Monday, because they need you to move at pace. I think going forward in the future, we'll be seeing more use of AI, obviously in a safe, secure, controlled manner, but actually using that to help us analyse data. So for things like workforce planning, for kind of modelling, looking at how many hours might be needed to fulfil tasks across certain departments, scenario modelling and things like that. That can really be a good way to test different organisational structures, using AI to analyse large amounts of data very quickly. What else would I look for? I think HRISs that have a good org chart can be really useful, because you can see the hierarchy, you can see the organisation at a glance. And also, when you're going through restructure, you want to be able to easily update that then going forward. If you maybe have to lose half of a department or something like that, you don't want to end up in the aftermath having to spend hours or days or weeks redoing all of the org structure in the system. A lot of the modern ones now use a drag and drop tool, so you can take information on an employee and their role and move that around. So that can be quite useful as well.
Yeah, lots of good points there. And you're right. Preparing organisation charts can take ridiculous amounts of time, can't it? And it's not particularly value-added time. It's just having to go through it. And again, you make that point there in terms of having a single source. If your organisation charts are driven from that single source, as opposed to downloading something and then giving it to someone and saying, can you update the org charts? That sounds like that's an incredibly important part. If you were speccing out a system or looking to upgrade, that you'd want to have that in there generally, I would think.
Absolutely, yeah. And I guess another thing is about automated workflows. So especially at a time where you might be having to produce mass letters around consultation periods and to invite large numbers into meetings or things like that, being able to actually bulk produce letters on large scales if you needed to can be really useful. So having those kind of built-in automated processes and workflows can be good as well from a HR system.
So the sense I'm getting here is obviously we've been talking about a HRIS in the context of redundancy and restructure, but having it at the heart of your people strategy in a sense, in terms of what's the kind of information that you absolutely need in terms of, yes, you've got the basics that everybody would need, but what's the information that's going to help you drive the people strategy and give you accurate data, accurate reports, as you say, and really save time and free up time for doing other more value-added things rather than spending lots of time analysing data, which a system could do for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we will see more of that in the future, that the HR function becomes more strategic and less admin focused, and that HR do embrace those AI tools. Obviously, like I mentioned, it's about doing it in a secure way. But yeah, definitely that is the way that I think we're going to be going in the future. So making sure we've got good HR systems in place, we've got tools and confidence to be able to use those tools, that will free us up to work more strategically, I think, generally across the HR function.
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly at a time like if you are managing a restructure, you'll know from your experience, it's an incredibly busy time and you want to be devoting your time to the individuals. As we said at the start, didn't we, intended the best way to manage a process. The best way to manage a process is to be that person who's supporting the leaders, who's got time for the individual and who can create that trust and give them the support that they need rather than spending hours grinding through data and scrabbling around on spreadsheets and correcting things that might be wrong. And we've all done that kind of thing. That happens in a restructure. I'm not saying it doesn't, but the way that we as a HR function can add most value is by being there for the individuals.
Yeah, 1000%. I totally agree with that. That's got to be the heart of it, people in the centre of what we're doing. So I guess the data is really just, if that's there, that's helping make it easier. In the background, it's supporting the process, because actually this whole process should be focused on the people, and people have got to be front and centre through the whole process. So use our skills and focus and support the individuals and to be there to help them through this process and in the best way that we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's been a really interesting overview, Gill. I love the tips that you gave us around getting that data right, helping people who don't have a system to get the spreadsheets locked down and make sure that if you're working with spreadsheets, you're doing that in the right way. And just, giving us some insights into what the future looks like. And if somebody was wanting to specify or update or upgrade a system, there's lots of things they can be doing, not just useful for a restructure, but useful in general. So I really enjoyed that overview, and hopefully that's been useful for people listening as well. So if people want to get in touch with you, how can they find you?
So I've got LinkedIn profile, so they can find me on LinkedIn, or they can have a look at the Full Circle HR website. Give me an inquiry that way. So either an email inquiry or message me through LinkedIn. Either way is fine.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Jill. I'll pop the links in the show notes for anyone that wants to get in touch. And thank you so much for today. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, I really enjoyed it. Thanks ever so much for having me, June.
Thank you so much for listening to the Redundancy Matters podcast. I hope you found today's episode helpful. It would mean a lot to me if you would follow, rate and review this podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts, as this helps it reach more people who are managing redundancies. Let me know what you thought, and if you have ideas for future episodes, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me on LinkedIn, June Hogan, and get in touch via my website, wildwoodcoaching.co.uk, where you'll also find more resources to help you manage redundancies. I hope you'll join me again soon for the next episode of Redundancy Matters.